Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you doing? Okay. Today we are going to start an introduction to new criticism, which is the third theory. Before I start explaining this point, I have to take you away a little bit back to remind you that the two theories that we discussed before, which is Aristotelian theory and Romantic theory, they were really interested about the feelings either of the reader or the author. So, for example, the Aristotelian theory, they were concerned about achieving the catharsis, which is catharsis were for the reader, for the spectator, for the watcher. So Aristotle made the whole objective or the function of a criticism in achieving catharsis and generating the sensitivity and fear. Where? Inside the reader. So the main focus was about how the reader or the spectator feels. This is the function of the of literature or tragedy according to Aristotle. If we come to the Romantics, they were concerned about the subjectivity, which is the author's feeling, The most important thing is the subjectivity of the writer, to express the feelings that are generated inside the writer himself. A new criticism is bringing a new approach. What do we mean by that? We mean that they never cared about the feelings inside the reader, nor the feelings of the author. But they consider that the text can be explained far away from the feelings of the reader and the feelings of the author. We have to explain the text from the text itself, without making any reference either to the reader or to the author, and therefore the central idea of a new criticism is that a literary work has a concrete entity. And what do they mean by having concrete entity? It means that any literary work is an independent from the feelings of the author and can be explained far from the feelings of, but it is independent from both. Why should it be attached either to the reader or to the writer? No, we can deal with the text and the text only, far away from the feelings or the biography of the writer, nor from the emotions and feelings of the reader himself. This is the meaning of having a concrete entity, an independent entity. It can be analyzed to discover its true and concrete meaning far from the author's intentions, beliefs, and emotional status. Unfortunately, what they have taught us in the Arabic literature in schools, every time, I do remember till today, that the teachers, of the Arabic language and literature, they used to tell us, وَمَا يَعْنِيهِ الْكَاتِبُ وَمَا يَقْصِدُهُ الْكَاتِبُ. This is what they used to tell us. But how can we know ما يعنيه الكاتب or ما يقصده الكاتب? From the text itself. But do you know, that this is exactly what the writer meant? Can you tell me that this was the intention of the writer? We cannot be sure. We cannot be sure that this is what the writer intended or this is what he believed in, And therefore, we have to analyze the text far away from the intention of of the writer, far away from the intention of or his emotional status, whether he was depressed, he was happy, or he was feeling down. we are not supposed to refer to the author. Just imagine that the text is authorless. What's the meaning of the text is authorless? Right? Without an author. Right? And all what you need is to read the text and the text only, far away from any reference. Don't go back to the biography of the writer. Don't go back to his own feelings or the time in which, he wrote this poem, right? In order to analyze the literary text, because we will never be able to identify what the author, right, intended to mean when he wrote it, right? And we have to assume as well that the writer is not the speaker, right? The speaker in the literary work and poetry, we are not supposed to assume that he is the writer, right? Unless we have a concrete evidence. And the second thing that, right, we are supposed to analyze this literary work away from the values and beliefs of the reader himself. I will let you, right, understand what I mean. Let's bring a certain text, right? This certain text is given to a post-colonial, right, critic, and it is given to a romantic critic, right, and to Aristotelian critic. The post-colonial critic will analyze the text according to his own beliefs and values. What he is going to look at is going to look at the image of the oppressor and the image of the oppressed and the colonial features that are found in the text, right? The romantic person who is not going to look at the same values and the same beliefs, but he is going to look at the principles of romanticism, the characteristics of romanticism found in the text. And the same thing, right, according to Aristotle, is going to analyze the plot according to what? According to Aristotelian structure. And therefore, each one is analyzing the text according, each reader will analyze the text according to his values and his own beliefs, which might be far away from the intention of the writer, first of all. And the writer never intended to say anything. And therefore, what should we do? Just forget the writer, forget his own biography, his own beliefs, his own historical period, and the same thing, we have to forget our own values and beliefs of the reader, right? What comes to his mind, the intertextuality, right, that comes to his mind. No, they are not supposed to be, right, part of the analysis. And then, what are we supposed to do? A question. هيك حيرتنا انت. Okay, what should we do? Right, let's see first what are their theoretical principles before we tell you about the methodology of the analysis. I mean that we need to understand, right, their values, their theoretical principles, and then after we explain the theoretical principles of new criticism, we will let you know, right, what is their methodology of analysis. By the way, this, school is the nearest to the Arab method of analysis, right, of literature, right? And you will discover that when we come to the methodology, you will find that, right, this is something that we practice every day, or we used to practice every day, right? What was their principal belief? The text and the text only. Just make a close reading. Read it first, then read it another time, right? And from the text, you can analyze everything that you like. So the only thing that we depend on is the text and the text only. By the way, new criticism has another name. It is called Modernism. It is called Modernism. And it was based on the principles of T.S. Eliot, right, in his famous, right, essay about tradition and the individual talent. He wrote an essay, T.S. Eliot. It is called, right, about modernism, which put the cornerstones, the basic ideas, right, of the whole thing. And I need to tell you also that T.S. Eliot did not come to this theory, right, without having a background. I mean that he participated in a theory before that. It is called, right, the aesthetic movement, right, and after that he became another part with his teacher Ezra Pound. His name is Ezra Pound, right, and made a new theory, all right, of writing literature, not criticizing literature, right. It is called, right, the school of imagism. In other words, that he had, right, his own views in literature, the aesthetic movement, imagism, and after imagism, right, he wrote this essay, right, about the modernism or new criticism, in which he focuses only, right, on the text and the text only, right, and rejected the views, right, before him that are concerned with the feelings of the author or the feelings of the reader. And as I told you, some people, they call it textual criticism, right? Some other people, they call it modernism or formalism or ontological formalism, criticism. Ontological, it means, right, that they assume that the text has ontological existence. I mean, an independent existence that can be explained far away from the reader and from the writer. And therefore it is called ontological criticism, right? Or the aesthetic criticism. Aesthetic criticism, it is the kind of which focuses on discovering the aesthetic values of the text. Do you know what I mean of aesthetic? Jamaliya. Right? That what are the aesthetic values, right, can be found in the text. Whether it is called textual modernism or whatever, right, we have a general name. We call it what? We call it a new criticism. New criticism. But of course it is no longer new. It is no longer new, right? And some right now, even at our university, right, some critics, if you ask them, right, what is the best way, right, of criticizing, right, a literary work, they would say, right, modernism, thinking that modernism is now, and they don't know that modernism was at the beginning of the 20th century, right? It means that it has been, right, it started, right, 100 years ago, 100 years, but it is no longer modern and it is no longer new. But this is just a name. This is just a name. And some of them, they say, I am a modernist. أنا حداثي. عمركم مش سمعتوا بالحداثة، مدرسة الحداثة, right? هي مدرسة الحداثة قبل 100 سنة, right? That's what I'm saying. Well, yeah, fine. So what is the basic principles that were reflected in T.S. Eliot's, right, essay, Tradition and the Individual Talent? I told you that this essay, right, again, it is called or entitled Tradition and Individual Talent. Tradition, what does he refer to? The tradition of literary tradition, the previous literary tradition in the history of right, English literature. And the individual talent as a person, right? The reader as an individual, right? So the basic principles I am just highlighting, right? I'm not going to go into details, but I'm highlighting what were the most important ideas reflected in that essay, right? The first one, that a criticism must be directed towards the poem, not the poet. That our focus is not supposed to be on the author, but it is supposed to be on the text and the text only, right? I'm reminding you that this one came directly after Romanticism, right? Whose focus was on the poet and the poet only, right? About the feelings of the poet. But now he is coming to reject, right, the principles of Romanticism, right? Why should we care about the writer? Why should we care about his own feelings? The most important thing is the text, right? Fine.
But
And
they appreciated the general characteristics.
sorry?
The new critics, they appreciated the general characteristics of Romanticism.
Of course not, right? That they found a kind of exaggeration in making or shedding light only on the poet, on the subjectivity, right? We don't know and we cannot figure out how does the poet feel, right, while he is writing the text, because, right, it will be something subjective, individual, right? And therefore, right, the best way we can analyze the text from, the poem from the text itself, not with reference to how did the writer feel, right? Because that one is not really important to us. But what is important is what we can discover. What are the aesthetic values, right, in the text? We are appreciating the text, not appreciating the values or the feelings of the author.
So, how do some writers claim that Romanticism affected the new criticism?
Right, affected them in a negative way, right? Affected them because it is a counter movement. A new criticism is a kind of a counter movement for Romanticism, right? It is a kind of the opposite, exactly like the Romantics, right, who were considered as a counter movement for the neoclassical, right? Because Romantics exaggerated much, right, about the individuality, right, as well as the subjectivity, and they cared only about themselves, but they never cared about the reader. They never cared, as if they are writing to themselves. Where is the role of the reader here, right? The reader is not given any interest at all, and at the same time, we don't care about the reader. We care about the text. The text is the valuable one, not the author. The text, the product, is more important than the producer, right? When you buy a car, for example, right, and you are going to use that car, your interest is in the product or in the producer, right? And the product is more important to me than the producer, right? And the second idea, major idea in Eliot's tradition, T.S. Eliot, the poet must not infuse his personal poem with emotions, but use a language that conveys impersonal feelings common to all humankind. He is asking or requiring the poets to be objective again. Enough subjectivity, right? But not a mere objectivity, something which is applicable to everyone. Something which is applicable that can, any reader can explain the text with reference to humanity, with reference to himself, not only with reference to whom? To the author only. Now, yeah, to be objective. The language here, look at this, but to use a language that conveys impersonal feelings. What I mean of impersonal feelings? Objectivity.
Not related to the author.
Not related to the author himself, right? And this language is supposed to be common to all humankind, very well known, right, to humankind, right? And the last important idea is this, that the studying or criticizing, analyzing any literary work, right, is a process of discovering the aesthetic, right, aspects of the text. And what do we mean by the aesthetic aspects? Figuring out the figures of speech, the usage of the words, the connotations and the denotations of the words, right? And this is what we used to do in our whole life in Arabic literature, right? To do what? Just discover, right, وين الكناية وين التشبيه وين الاستعارة المكنية وين المش عارف ايه, right? As if this is only the translation. And this is actually, yeah, it is the part of modernism. But it is not all modernism. It is not all modernism. Well, what are the principles of modernism? We will find ourselves that we are repeating the same ideas. Repeating the same ideas, right? Which is the concentrating on the text, forgetting the reader and forgetting the writer. Right, so here the assumptions we mean by what were the theoretical assumptions of right in new criticism. Is there anyone who would like to say anything about it? Already we said, right? Okay, the first one, that the poem has its ontological status. I just explained this one. What do we mean by an ontological status? It has its own existence as an object with an independent structure. Independent from whom? From both the reader and the author. Right? This is the meaning of ontology. So if we want to deal, we have to deal with the text itself. A poem cannot be judged with reference to its author's feelings or intentions. This is called intentional fallacy. All right? So this is a new term, right, written by T.S. Eliot. What do we mean by intentional fallacy? What's the meaning of fallacy? Intentional fallacy. Fallacy means mistake. يعني مغالطة مقصودة. Intentional fallacy. That when we analyze the literary work,
When we try to discover
right?
the intention.
Yeah, when we try to discover the intention and the feeling of the author, we are making intentional fallacy. Intended mistake, an intentional fallacy. مغالطة مقصودة.
But sometimes trying to discover the intentions of the poet, why did he write this poem, helps in understanding the poem itself.
And how would you discover that?
By reading his biography.
And how can you tell me that his biography affected his own feelings? Can you be sure that his own biography affected, right, him in writing a certain that text? You cannot be sure.
Like through his life events, I can.
We have a school, right, which is right historical, right, criticism. It refers to the biography and considers that the biography of the writer, but this one long time ago. You belong to the past, sister. Right? You cannot judge any literary work right from his own biography. I tell you what, right? I know, right, a poet, hold on. A poet who lives in Gaza, right, here, right? He witnessed all, like every one of us, right? But the only thing that he writes, right, and he was, he's not living a luxurious life, living like every Gazan, and having a limited income as well, right? But all his works about love, about happiness, about joy, right? How can we explain his own feelings or these poems in reference to his own biography, and he is handicapped as well? Cannot imagine.
Oh my God.
I'm serious. Sometimes, right? Cannot judge things. Yes, Lema, you wanted to say something.
I want to say, even if we think that this is wrong, the best criticism that I've seen for works don't relate anyone to the writer. Like novels that we read and play, like they don't tell us anything about the writer. I don't know anything about the author of novels that
Yeah.
I read, but I still enjoyed the novel.
Exactly. Enjoying the text, right? But whenever you write, you should not write about your enjoyment as a reader. You have to analyze it. Because, okay, good, fine. So if you think that you can analyze any literary work with reference to, right, the author's feelings, right, you are making an intentional fallacy. Intentional fallacy. Don't forget this term. Because we are going to have another term which is similar, right? But All right, the intentional fallacy, what is that? It is when we believe, like Noor just now, that a poem is only an expression of the writer's experience, and we have to refer to his feelings and intentions to analyze it. Right? So she is making an intentional fallacy. Understood?
Yes.
Questions? Good. Well, right, that our great emphasis should be placed on what? First of all, on the etymology of the language. What is the etymology? Right, the words, lexicon, the origins of the words, right, and lexicon used. We have to analyze the words, the expressions, the sentences, right? Textual, something, textual criticism. We call it what? Textual criticism. The first emphasis is supposed to be on the etymology, right? Etymology, the lexicon, the phrases, their origins, right? Their connotations, their denotations. Right. A reader's emotional responses to the text are neither important nor equivalent to its interpretation as well. I mean, we talked first about what? About the writer. We are doing the same thing here. That the reader, his emotional responses, we don't care about them. You tell me, I enjoyed it, Lama. We don't care about your enjoyment. I'm sorry to say that. Right? Okay, this is what he says, not me. Right? We care about analyzing the text, the words, the sentences, right? Their structure, right? The structure of the words, right? Their connotations, their denotations, right? The symbolism found or whatsoever, right? But to talk about, all right, your emotional responses, it doesn't mean this is what, right, the interpretation of the work. On the contrary, what is it called? This is an error of judgment, right? We call it the affective fallacy. So what is the affective fallacy? Yeah, but error of judgment in what? If we analyze the work in reference to the reader's emotional responses, right? And thinking that these are equivalent to the interpretation of the literal work, which is the opposite. If it is related, if we make analysis in relation to the reader, what do we call it? Intentional fallacy. And if we make this analysis with reference to the feelings, right, of the reader, we call it affective fallacy.
So how am I supposed to describe a novel, for example?
We will tell you. Just wait. We are talking about the theoretical assumptions. We will come to the methodology after that. Right? The methodology, just do 1, 2, 3, 4, and you will be a new critic. Right? That belongs. Now, who is no longer new. Right? Okay. The chief characteristics of the poem's structure is coherent or interrelatedness. Right? Who can understand? How do you understand this sentence? The chief characteristics of a poem's structure is coherence or interrelatedness. That one of the most important things that we have to analyze in the literary work, the logical development of ideas into the work. And what do we call the logical development of ideas in any text? What do we call it? We call it coherence. We call it coherence, right? How the ideas are related to each other, right? Or interrelatedness of what? Of the ideas inside the text. This is the most important thing. Not only an aesthetic, right, criticism, right, in which we discuss, right, the etymology as well as, right, the figures of speech, but we have to discuss ideas and how do they develop, inside the text, and how they are related inside the text. أنا شايف ناس نايمة. إيش رأيكم؟ Right? What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Right? Do you like it? Do you dislike it?
It makes a lot of sense.
Does it? Okay. This is what we said also about Romanticism. And this is what we said also about what? About Aristotle. Everyone makes sense in a way.
Well, it's quite difficult to analyze a literary work away from your feelings about this literary work.
All right. Yes.
You know, like when we want to analyze something, you know, avoid our emotion, but at the same time, we can't avoid our beliefs, our thoughts, our idea. Because if there were a symbol, in our culture, it means something, or it means something to me, you know. At the same time, you will refer to your beliefs and your own thoughts.
Right. This is what is the following theory says. Do you understand what I mean? This is what readers' response say, that we don't have a complete objectivity. And even if I am analyzing the meaning, right, I'm analyzing according to how I understand it.
Yeah.
Right? Yes.
Like me as a reader, or like reading a poem, like I don't care about the structure of the poem. What I care about is the like my emotions and my feelings.
So you are romantic. You are, right, you are a new reader.
Like this is
Ah.
touch.
Yeah, but this is why we are teaching you, right? We are teaching you different theories in order to see how can we use each one. That a text can be, right, dealt with by different critics, and each one is going to give a different criticism of the same text, right? Yeah, please.
But at the same time, I believe it's really important to discover the figures of speech of literary work
Yeah.
and the stylistics of
Yeah.
literary work.
So you can mix, right? And you file. It is really important
Like
to
we should
refer
find a
to
way
refer
to
to refer
basically
to the biography
yeah.
of the writer, and it is really important to figure out what are the feelings of the reader, right? At the same time, so you mixed up how many theories? Three together,
Like we must find
right?
a way to
Right? Yeah.
mix them up.
So you are following an eclectic approach, critical eclectic approach. You are picking some of everyone, right? Right, so the discovering the development or the logical development of ideas in a literary work is very important according to a new criticism. Well, the form is also, or the structure and the beauty, and this is what we mean by the form. Form here, it doesn't refer only to the structure, but, right, okay, that and the content, right, of the poem are inseparable. Some people, they say that the form can be separated from the content, right? I mean, for example, let's talk about the sonnet, right? Do you know that the sonnet, it has a kind of a rigid form?
Yes.
Are you familiar with the form of the sonnet?
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
It has like A, B, A.
I mean that it is usually a poem that consists of 14 lines. It consists of, right, 3 quatrains and a couplet. It is supposed to be written according to the iambic pentameter. We have a rigid rhyme scheme, different between, Spenser, right, Petrarch, and William Shakespeare. That we have a rigid form, right? So what, right? T.S. Eliot assumes that this rigid or this form cannot be separated from the meaning or from the content, that the form is actually part of the content, right? Cannot be separated, that their form is not part of the meaning. No, the form is part of the meaning. The form is part of the meaning, all right? I mean that you will find that in the sonnet, the structure is also meaningful. In the first quatrain, what is going to happen? In the second quatrain, we have a second thing. In the third quatrain, we have development of ideas in each quatrain, and the couplet is supposed to be like a conclusion, right? That the form is meaningful. The form is meaningful. And anyone assumes that the form is not meaningful and can be separated from the content or the truth or the meaning of the text, they are mistaken. They are mistaken. So our function as, all right, we are supposed to explain both. What are they? The form and the content. Right? And we have to explain the form as part of the meaning. Yes, please.
Every stanza is still contained. Like we have,
It is not self-contained, right? I mean that it has independent existence. It doesn't have independent existence in the sonnet. That each one of them is reflecting interrelated ideas. We have logical development of ideas, right? The first one, right, usually in the sonnet, for example, it reflects what we call it the single emotion, right, which is the basic idea of the sonnet, is usually reflected in the first what? Right? Then we have the first development, which is the first analysis of the single emotion, right? And then we have also, right, the reasoning for the explanation in the third one, in the third, right, stanza, and we have the conclusion in the third. So the form is really important in analyzing the coherence, and the coherence is the meaning, which is the development of the logical development of ideas into the literary work, which is part of the form. فاهمين؟ لا. بين اللي بيبان على اللي زي ما بقول اللي ماكل الفول بيبان على وشه. فاهمين تمام؟ No. Good. All right. I am saying that we as new critics, we are not supposed to separate between the form and the content. The form is part of the meaning, exactly like the content. And anyone who is supposed to be a new critic is supposed to analyze both. What? The form and the content. Right? Yeah. But when we analyze both of them, we will be able to reach the full meaning. طبعا انتوا زي اللي تايهين هالجدا.
Do they have,
تايهين.
a specific form or structure?
Each kind of poetry they have, right? For example, right, the kind of the lyric poetry, it has a form,
No,
right?
I mean the new critics.
No, what do you mean by sitting?
When they write poetry, do they have a specific structure?
No, they don't have. But even if they don't have, right, we have to explain it into part of what, right, of the meaning. Let's say, for example, if we find a poem in which doesn't have regular meter, it doesn't have regular rhyme, right? It can be part analyzed as a kind of a psychological, right, effect on the writer himself, right? He is really confused, or he is not feeling well, and this is why he is, right, using this form, right? Or the speaker. We are not referring to the poet, we are referring to the main character, the speaker in the poem, or the hero in the poem is actually in a state in a status of psychological, having a psychological problem, for example, or maybe he is emotionally tense. It depends. That the form can be analyzed in the light of what is being, reflected by the text itself. Well, therefore, right, what is the conclusion? That is the conclusion of these theories. A poem is not an equal to its paraphrasing, right? This is very, very important, right? Right, when we say that I can paraphrase the poem and I can reflect its own meaning. No. Why? Because it doesn't have the same form. Paraphrasing, it doesn't have the same form of the literary work. قلنا لكم هاي قصيدة. Right? We have a poem. And I want you to explain it. Right? What do? You usually explain it and paraphrase the meaning. You paraphrase the meaning and you think that this is the meaning of what? The meaning of the work. No, actually it is not. Why? Because paraphrasing, it doesn't have the same form of the original work. And anyone believes that the paraphrasing is equal to the meaning of the poem, he is making a big mistake. It is called the heresy of Paraphrase. The heresy of, this is a new term, the heresy of Paraphrase. Bid'ah.
Heresy of Paraphrase. I don't get this point.
You didn't get the point, okay? Well, fine. Let's say that I wrote a poem for you. This poem consists of 10 lines, and it has, it consists of a heroic couplet. I mean, every 2 lines, they have the same rhyme, and it consists of iambic pentameter, 5 feet, right? One is stressed and one is unstressed, okay? We have regular form for the poem, right? Which shows the formality of the text itself. That the text is formal in nature because it has a regular a regular form. And you, wanted to explain the poem. So all what you did is paraphrase the meaning. And you told me this is the meaning. I tell you no. Your paraphrase doesn't have the same form of the original poem. All right? The form is part of the meaning. You have to explain to me how does the form work, right? And what is the part of the form in explanation of the meaning, right? So if you think paraphrasing reflects the meaning of the poem, you are making a heresy, right? And what do we call it? We call it the heresy of paraphrase. وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. Right? You are not actually, making equality between the paraphrasing and, what should I do? I have to, paraphrase, not only paraphrasing, I have to talk about the form and the connotations of the form. I have to discover, also what I call it, the aesthetic values of the text and anything that can be understood by focusing on the etymology of the literary work. Then I say, okay, this is, I think, a text analysis. This is the text analysis. Well, paraphrasing helps, but doesn't create a full understanding, right? And if we paraphrase, we are not paraphrasing to make it equal to what? It is only one step of many. It is only one step of many steps. All right. We will come to the methodology, And all right. Well, we started by explaining the theoretical background of the new criticism, and inshallah, in the following class, we will start explaining to you how the methodology, what exactly you need to do in order to be a new critic. Right? Inshallah, we will start next time. Assalamu alaikum. Allah yatikum al-afiyah.